evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross, and in the studio with me this evening is Day Tucker, our Rural Affairs correspondent. Good evening, Day.
Good evening.
Also, straight into the thick of it tonight, Day, and of course the big news tonight is the Chinese coronavirus. And the Scottish Government has updated their advice today in actually a report which we just have in from the Scottish Government spokesperson. I'll quote you here. There are currently no confirmed cases of coronavirus in Scotland, and the risk to the Scottish public remains low. Following travel to Wuhan, China, 2 people confirmed as diagnosed with influenza are now being tested for the Wuhan novel coronavirus as a precautionary measure. 3 further people are also undergoing testing on a similar precautionary basis. As the situation develops, we will update should there be any confirmed cases of coronavirus, rather than providing a running update on cases being considered on a precautionary basis. Now, this is on the back of an earlier report from Professor Jürgen Haas, who is the Professor of Infection Medicine at the University of Edinburgh. And he said that he believed there would be many more cases from other cities in the UK. The 3 cases that were suspected were in Edinburgh, and the other was thought to be in Glasgow. Tests are being carried out, and none of the patients have yet been confirmed as having the disease. So we've got a new virus which seems to have emerged in China. Allegedly, this has come from Wuhan. And the Chinese government has locked down not just Wuhan itself, but 2 other cities in the near vicinity. 11 million people are restricted basically to their homes almost.
Yes.
Incredible.
Only in China could that happen. It's amazing, well, the control that they do have. And how you know they can stop things in their tracks. If they want to put a town somewhere, shove the people out the way and put the town there. And of course, in a situation like this, that's actually an asset to have that kind of control.
And with such a densely populated area, I would imagine a disease which is obviously easy to communicate between individuals by coughing is going to spread like wildfire.
Oh, yes.
Now, I understand that the Chinese government were also worried that with the Lunar New Year coming up, the Chinese New Year coming up, that many millions of Chinese people will be travelling all around the world at the moment.
That's right.
To celebrate with friends and family.
Yes.
And including, obviously, some young Chinese students who've come into Scotland from China itself.
Yes.
Do you think, Day, that there may be... maybe blowing this out of proportion a little bit, we have had scares like this in the past with SARS viruses and avian flu and various other things.
Yes, and
do you think this is an overreaction?
No, I don't. I think one has to be really, really cautious, and especially given the amount of plane travel that there is these days, you really need to nip this in the bud, and you're better to be, make people a little bit uncomfortable for a short period of time and be very cautious than to allow it to get out of hand.
So just to be on the safe side rather than risking any more deaths. I understand actually that there have only been, so far as we know anyway, reported 3 deaths out of the original 222 cases the Chinese first reported.
Yes.
They now believe that might be many thousands of cases now, but nobody's sure.
Yes.
Anyway, I'd like to insert a little story at this point. We have the Brexit bill, of course, gaining royal assent today. This has outraged many people, but Boris Johnson's Brexit deal has become law after it received royal assent from the Queen, having cleared all its stages in Parliament. Tory MPs cheered the Deputy Speaker, Nigel Evans, as he confirmed at the House of Commons on Thursday that there was now a European Union Withdrawal Agreement Act. Johnson finally succeeded in getting his bill through the Commons and the Lords after several failed attempts by his predecessor, Theresa May. He was not in the Commons to hear the news, but said that the moment was a significant milestone. At times it felt like we would never cross the Brexit finish line, but we've done it, he said.
The Brexit finish line?
Well, I'm pretty certain it's not finished yet, is it, Day?
I mean, that must be another huge con. the
Well,
Brexit finish line. Silly man.
I think it's a technicality, isn't it,
Yeah,
to say
well.
that they've now got the bill and they can now enact it.
Well,
However, as the Tories cheered the SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford registered his anger at the constitutional crisis that passing a Brexit bill against the wishes of Scotland and the other involved nations had caused, we're faced with a situation which is completely unprecedented when the government in Edinburgh, Belfast and Cardiff have not given their consent to this Act of Parliament. And that completely contravenes the devolution settlement that made it clear that the consent of the devolved administrations had to be given on bills of Parliament that become Acts of Parliament. So this is...
so it can't become an act without our consent. Is that what you're saying?
That was the original understanding of the Devolution Act.
Right.
And But of course the Conservative Party had inserted the word normally into this as a caveat, saying they wouldn't normally legislate on anything which affected the devolved administration, but in this case they made an exception.
I remember that being picked up on when that insertion was put in, but nothing came of it.
Well, there have been rumblings today also about Section 38 of this Act,
Right.
in which there appears to be a threat to dilute or to reduce the powers of Holyrood.
Yes.
And this has angered a lot of people in
Yes.
social media today. May also have seen
Yes.
comments today.
Well, and it's also something that people have been warning about for quite some time.
Indeed, I think I warned about it myself,
You
that
did.
this erosion would start. I think
Yes.
hundreds of other bloggers and
Yes.
pundits have said the same.
And Ruth Davidson herself, when I remember her coming to our NFUS AGM maybe 2 years ago, might even be 3, and she started to talk about how the powers were going to be devolved back to Westminster, because it made sense to have a UK single market.
Yes, the so-called UK single
So
market.
she started all that.
Oh, okay. Well, with a trade deal coming up, supposedly, with the Americans and obviously, supposedly with Europe, there has to be some unity somehow or other, I guess, to get, as he said, get Brexit over the line. But when 3 countries out of 4 disagree,
Say no.
it is...
It's not unity, is it?
It certainly isn't, and it shows that it is mainly the South that has voted for this. Now, the SNP had also warned that the Tory government is preparing to sell out Scotland's fishing industry after experts claimed that UK officials are prepared to give in on fishing in Brexit talks in order to gain concessions for the financial sector.
Yes, which is what happened the last time.
So to save the square mile in London from further damage, they're prepared to throw Scotland's fishermen under the bus.
But they always were.
And this is exactly what happened the previous time, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you think Scotland's fishermen in the northeast are going to take
Oh,
this news?
they'll just say, no, it won't happen, it won't happen. They'll just bury their heads in the sand and say it won't happen.
Yeah, I think, suspect the West Coast fishermen might be more upset by it than those up in Aberdeen.
Yes, some of the, all but one. There was one, was it on television the other night? And he's a shell fisherman, and he was not worried. He wanted Brexit. And then when the interviewer pointed out to him that he would have tariffs put on it, and he said, oh no, we don't want that.
And his shellfish might be delayed getting
And
to
his
customers and
shellfish
might go
would
off
be
in the
delayed.
truck.
But it won't happen, he said. It won't happen.
It's amazing how people can justify things sometimes.
Yes.
Now, the SNP's MSP Stuart Stevenson said today, the Tories sold out Scotland's fishermen on our way into Europe, and now they're gearing up to do the same on the way out. It's outrageous that Boris Johnson is prepared to use Scotland's multi-million-pound fishing industry as a bargaining chip. The Tories should be ashamed. Now, how do you think, Dave, that Brexit is going to affect your industry, the farming industry particularly? This is your area of expertise. The fishermen obviously have mixed feelings, I think you could say. How does the farming industry
Well, all I
this?
can say is that when a few of us went on a visit to our processor, and we said to them, where are we going to stand in terms of Brexit? How is this going to affect us? And he said, well, if it's a no deal, we're absolutely finished. He said, if it's still within the single market, then we can negotiate.
Yeah.
So it all depends on whether Boris Johnson sticks to the no deal, which seems to be the way they're heading, or if he gives in and allows the single market.
So it's all balanced on whether or not Boris achieves a deal.
Yes.
With the. And what about a regulatory alignment? This is the other thing which Sajid Javid said last week, that the UK was not going to maintain its alignment with EU legislation and regulation.
For my industry, that would be a red line for the EU. They would not accept our products unless we maintained the standards that we've got at present.
So that would make a trade deal on farm produce from Scotland at least impossible to achieve.
Yes, yes.
Now, do you think that today's announcement that now that this bill has gained royal assent, the Queen has signed it off, something else which shocked a lot of people today, is it going to bring the IndyRef 2020 any closer? Is it going to accelerate things, do you believe?
I think so. It's difficult to tell, but from what I see on Twitter and from listening to the minister's announcement yesterday, I think it is.
Which minister were you? What you mean the
First Minister.
The First Minister?
Yes, she announced that it would be before 2020, and she even mentioned the month. She said September.
So she has still, well, she said that she would be making an announcement this week.
Next week, was it not?
Well, she said next week. I'm trying to remember when she said that, though.
Well, we're on Thursday now, so I think it will be next week.
It may be the early part of next week, but certainly I expect this to happen before BE Day, as I call it, Brexit Day.
And I do know, I mean, I am a member of the SNP because I signed up when they were treated so badly in Westminster. I was so appalled at the behaving that I just signed up, and I've never been a member of a political party up until then. But I now get all the emails, and they are very busy, always out campaigning. My local branch is out campaigning on Saturday again.
Well, speaking of Holyrood, and there's some breaking news today, which some people may have seen this already on social media, that the proceedings of the First Minister's questions was interrupted today by two, I think you would call them hecklers, who were shouting out that Nicola Sturgeon had some connection with IRA, or called her an IRA brigadier or some such. Ken McIntosh, the Speaker, beg your pardon, what do they call him? The presiding officer, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
The presiding officer suspended First Minister's questions while these two men
were
kicked out. The question is, why would anybody do this? I mean, what do they expect to achieve? I mean, is this an attempt to smear the government by suggesting that they are?
I think it's an indication of how close we're getting to the independence referendum.
Do you think this is
it's
desperation?
A fear from the far right Orange Order type of unionist that there are. And I've always said to you, Ruth Davidson has a lot to answer for, because that was her strategy.
This dog whistle.
Particularly in the 2017 election. You know, she drummed them all up, and it didn't matter who they were. They didn't seem to vet them in any way.
Didn't care.
They didn't care as long as they stood as local councillors or whatever. And we've seen the damage that has been done, and how many of them have been, you know, proven bigots and had to, you know, step back because they've been so appalling.
Many people have suggested that this is a cynical attempt by the British establishment to Ulsterise the Scottish question, to turn it into another Northern Irish situation.
That is exactly it. Absolutely. And Ruth Davidson has a hand in this.
You think so?
I do. I absolutely do. You've only got to join the dots of where she came from. Now, why is it that that woman from Northern Ireland, the DUP leader...
Yeah.
Where was
Arlene Foster.
Arlene Foster, where was it she went on an Orange March? To Fife.
To Fife.
To Fife.
Uh-huh.
And that's where Ruth Davidson was at school, in Fife.
Bit of a coincidence.
And Ruth in the army and all the rest of this, the Territorial Army. There's so many coincidences there.
Yeah, it is, of course, alleged at the moment, this connection, but it is.
Oh, it's just me thinking all these things, joining the dots and using my emotional intelligence.
Well, we're going to move abroad now for our next story.
Also,
sorry, Dave.
also
you're not finished.
that 77 Brigade, again, it's alleged.
This is the branch of the UK Army, which is supposedly...
and they do all the cyber stuff.
So they're trying to sabotage the independence movement.
They're in a factory, an old disused factory in Gateside in Fife, apparently.
Is that true?
So, yes, so it's all...
Well, it'd be interesting to find out exactly where that is.
One day I know exactly where it is. One day I shall drive there and have a look.
I'll be interested to see if you're right, Dave. Well, anyway, listen, we'll probably get phone calls about that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, I need to move on, and we are now moving to Davos and to the teenage climate campaigner Greta Thunberg, who has today responded to the US Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and his jibe at her age and her qualifications. The US Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin told Greta Thunberg that she should study economics on Thursday, a jibe which prompted the climate activist to say that she didn't need a degree to know that the world was not meeting its climate targets. Asked about Thunberg's previous calls to divest from fossil fuels, Mnuchin told the news briefing in Davos, is she the chief economist? I'm confused. After she goes and studies economics in college, she can come back and explain that to us. So this just sounds like more condescension from supposed grown-ups.
Yes.
Mnuchin's quip came 2 days after Donald Trump and Thunberg sparred indirectly at the World Economic Forum in the Swiss ski resort. After Trump said the US had committed to joining the 1 trillion tree initiative, Thunberg resorted that fixing climate crisis was not only about trees. Thunberg, who has taken a year off school to advocate action on climate change, hit back on Twitter, saying it did not take a degree to know that the world was not meeting its climate targets. So either you tell us how to achieve this mitigation or explain to future generations and those already affected by the climate emergency why we should abandon our climate commitments, Thunberg said, days after addressing a packed panel at Davos Summit where she has been a star attraction. Now, Mnuchin said that the Trump administration's stance on climate and Thunberg's criticism had been, and I'm quoting here, misunderstood. There is a real misinterpretation of US policy. Let me be very clear. President Trump absolutely believes in clean air, clean water, and having a clean environment. Mnuchin later told CNBC that he didn't believe that there were just a few years left to prevent a climate catastrophe. There are a lot of other important issues threatening civilization, he said, citing health and nuclear proliferation. The youth needs to understand that climate is one issue that needs to be put in context with lots of other things, which I guess is true after a fashion day, but really is that the most important thing to be talking about at the moment?
No, I think it is the climate, because unless we get that reversing or changing in some way, there's not going to be any economics left to argue about.
I think Prince Charles was quoted as saying, what good would all your money do you if you have to watch it burn?
Yes.
In some terrible future event.
Absolutely. One of the scariest things I saw on Twitter was somebody talking about looking down on the methane escaping from up in the north there,
from
the
the
Arctic
tundra,
Circle,
where
from the
it's
tundra.
melted.
And that because the ice that was melting, and it's millions of years old,
Yes.
within it was held bugs and diseases and bacteria that were a real threat to civilization. And the thread underneath this particular person's tweet was really enlightening because people had never thought about that.
Well, it's widely known by medical staff that particularly viruses tend to locate in the soil.
Yes.
And
Anthrax.
Yeah, and they can become airborne quite easily when weather warms up suddenly.
Yes.
So yeah, it's perfectly feasible, I guess.
Yes.
Well, moving on to another, I guess, health story. This is the majority of disability benefit claims have been refused by the UK government. That's emerged. More than half of new claims in Scotland for the UK government's disability payment are refused, with tens of thousands of disabled people completely losing their benefits. Since the UK government replaced Disability Living Allowance, or DLA, with Personal Independence Payments, or PIP, in 2013, over 167,000 new claims in Scotland have been unsuccessful. Now that's equal to 54% of all applications. That seems an incredible number of people. The analysis produced by the Scottish Government shows that the share of new claimants awarded PIP has decreased since the benefit was introduced, from 74% in 2013-14 to just 56% in 2018-19, an 18% reduction. In addition, 39,000 people in Scotland have lost their disability benefits completely, costing them between £1,200 and £7,440 per year after losing their DLA entitlement when they were reassessed and refused PIP. Now, the government has got a bad reputation for this, hasn't it?
Yes.
They're constantly moving the goalposts for disabled people, and they have to jump through more and more hoops to get the benefits.
Yeah.
But it seems that since introducing these new benefits, like the PIP payment, that they've actually been much harsher on the assessments.
Yes.
And people are now
they've brought in a private firm to do it, haven't they? And since they've done that, it's got worse.
I believe in...
Because they'll be on a bonus, won't they?
They are. I believe the Scottish Government is planning to change that.
Yes.
In the future, but we could come back to that story another time. For disabled people, this is according to Shirley-Ann Somerville, the Social Security Secretary. For disabled people, the stress and anxiety of the application process and face-to-face assessment process are already hallmarks of the UK government's welfare reforms. Now, this latest analysis shows that those most in need in our society are less likely to get help or have to fight through the courts to get what they're entitled to, while tens of thousands of disabled people are facing greater hardship because they have completely lost their benefits. We'll do things differently as we start delivery of disability benefits over the next 18 months. Social Security is an investment in the people of Scotland, and we want people to receive all the support that they're entitled to. And that's why we're building a new social security system from scratch, with fairness, respect and dignity at its heart. So the Scottish Government's response to this seems swift, doesn't it? It's quite remarkable.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to just go through the rest of the story. In response to questioning from Green Social Security spokesperson Alison Johnson MSP at the meeting of the Social Security Committee, a DWP official confirmed that the department has no equivalent written strategy for increasing the take-up of benefits that it pays out, something the Scottish Government does have in respect of devolved payments. Alison Johnson said, the DWP is responsible for paying over £200 billion a year in social security, and for some of these payments, less than 2/3 of the people take up what they're entitled to. Is it any wonder then that tens of billions goes unclaimed every year when the agency responsible for the delivery doesn't even have a written strategy to ensure that people are aware of what they're entitled to and support to claim it? So this is the Greens responding to this as well, saying that it's ridiculous. The UK government doesn't have a strategy for ensuring people.
I mean, they just seem to be becoming more and more incompetent as a government.
Or perhaps just they don't care, maybe?
Well, they've never really cared, but they are also incompetent. I mean, you've only got to look at the ferry stuff to
yes, there is the ferry stuff as well.
We've got some very incompetent ministers.
Indeed. Well, Miss Johnstone went on that the UK government must act now on ensuring that everyone who's entitled to reserved benefits gets them. And the first step towards that is having a clear plan. So something which, well, we know that the UK government's plan is actually to get people off benefits rather than onto them.
Yes.
So it seems it's the reverse. Now we're going to travel across the Atlantic now to talk about Donald Trump and his impeachment hearing. The Democrats are trying to persuade reluctant Republicans to join them to push to remove Trump. Democrats were poised on Thursday to press forward at the US President Donald Trump's impeachment trial with their arguments for removing him from office, but his fellow Republicans showed no signs of softening their resistance to the Democratic case. The US Representative Adam Schiff and 6 other Democratic case managers are presenting arguments that Trump should be convicted of 2 articles of impeachment passed by the House last month: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, for pressuring the Ukraine to investigate Democratic rival Joe Biden last year and impeding the inquiry into the matter. Blocked so far in their drive to persuade the Republican-led Senate to let them call new witnesses, the Democrats are using the time instead to outline an extensive narrative, complete with video clips based on the testimony presented during the hearings in the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives. Now, this looks as if the upper house is deliberately pushing back against the Democrats in their attempts, and the Democrats appear to have to change their strategy. Right. So instead of trying to convert their opposite numbers in the Senate, they're now focusing on this narrative, telling the story of what Donald Trump is alleged to have done.
Right.
Do you think this is maybe an attempt by the Democrats to conduct a trial by media almost, or to get public opinion on their side?
Oh, I think it's always been that strategy, to get public opinion on their side.
Including perhaps Republicans or voters.
Yes.
To pressure them to say, look, this president.
Yes. Yep. Because I think they realise that, he is about to hang himself because he's getting worse and worse and worse. And this is not good for the Republican cause when they're trying to defend the indefensible. And the guy Scaramucci apparently is just there in the wings waiting to come in and,
And who is Scaramucci?
He's a very vibrant young senator. I think he's still a senator, but he worked for Donald Trump.
So he's a Republican?
Oh, yes, he's a Republican, but he's more normal. Well, no, he's not really normal because he's very, he's almost like he's on speed. He's very hyperactive, but very, very bright and clever.
Well, the case has focused on efforts by Mr. Trump and his aides to pressure the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate Biden, a leading 2020 Democratic presidential contender, and Biden's son on unsubstantiated corruption charges, as well as a discredited theory that Ukraine and not Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election. Nearly $400 million of US military aid to Ukraine was frozen during that period. We have the evidence to prove President Trump ordered the aid to be withheld. He did so to force the Ukraine to help his re-election campaign, Schiff said during his arguments on Wednesday that stretched for 8 hours. My goodness, that's a long time to make an argument. We can and will prove President Trump guilty on this conduct and of obstructing the investigation into his conduct. Trump denies wrongdoing, and his fellow Republicans who control the US Senate have said that his conduct did not fit the description of high crimes and misdemeanors outlined in the US Constitution as the rationale to oust a president. Goodness knows what their definition of a high crime or misdemeanor would be.
That's right.
Mr. Trump is almost certain to be acquitted by the 100-member Senate, where there are 53 Republicans, and where a two-thirds majority of those present is needed to remove him from office. Even if it seems to be a long shot that a significant number of Republicans would vote to remove the president, the trial presents the Democrats an opportunity to inflict political damage on Trump, who is seeking a second 4-year term in the November the 3rd election, with millions of Americans watching the televised proceedings. Now, Dave, do you think We've talked about this before a few times. It seems like a hopeless case for the Democrats to press this. So what do you think their motivation is here?
Well, the motivation is to damage the image, as if he wasn't doing enough himself to damage the image. And for what they're trying to do is prove to those who can see him doing no wrong and dent their image of him.
So to just undermine their
confidence in him. And they are succeeding in that.
And I understand that the Republicans in the Senate are also blocking key witnesses from coming forward. So not only has Mr. Trump been obstructing this, but his own Republican senators are dragging their feet and trying to prevent any witnesses from coming forward who might help to indict him.
And with any group, including the Republicans, there are the far right ones, the mass in the middle, and then the ones at the bottom,
the more moderates,
who are more moderate. And they will, the more moderates and the mass in the middle will be watching this and thinking to themselves, I'm not sure that's right, that you should be doing that.
Well, Mr. Trump faces 3 days in which to launch his defence. Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, said that it was unclear whether the Trump defence would need all 3 days. We will make a determination on our presentation based on what we are responding to and based on our affirmative case, Sekulow said. I don't know if it will take 10 hours, 14 hours, 24 hours or 6 hours. Democrats say that they will focus on the US Constitution, the impeachment articles and the facts relating to them on Thursday. Now we're going to start talking about the law, the impeachment articles, and bringing together the facts and the chronology here. Democratic Representative Jason Crow, one of the impeachment managers presenting the case, has said on CNN. So they're getting ready to go for it now, and I think the gloves will come off shortly by the looks of the story. Now, I'd like to move on again to another part of the world, this time a place where there seems to be constant turmoil, and that's Jerusalem. Monarchs, presidents and prime ministers travelled to Jerusalem to remember the Holocaust on Thursday and were given stark warnings not to ignore the escalating anti-Semitism and violence against Jews in Europe and the United States. Leaders congregated at the Yad Vashem Remembrance Centre on the Western Hills of Jerusalem for a 3-hour event held by the 5th World Holocaust Forum. Organisers hoped the meeting would provide a united front against anti-Jewish hatred, including in countries run by many of the attendees. Historical lessons were forgotten. Remembering the past is our duty, but it's not enough, said the narrator of a video played at the start of the ceremony, as the Russian President Vladimir Putin, the French President Emmanuel Macron and the US Vice President Mike Pence sat in the front row. The Tel Aviv University researchers last year catalogued nearly 400 attacks against Jewish people in 2018 and warned that anti-Semitism had mainstreamed. Increases were most notable in Western Europe and North America. France and Germany saw more than a 70% rise in reported anti-Semitic violence. Other studies have also shown knowledge of the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, were killed. And they showed that that memory is now fading. Moshe Kantor, the president of the World Holocaust Forum, said that 40% of European Jews were considering leaving their countries. Mr. Macron, speaking to French Israelis before the event, said, "A dark shadow of anti-Semitism is being reborn. I responded to the call to come to the Yad Vashem to say that this will never happen again. It's a battle that is never won," he said. "My determination to act on this is total." Prince Charles, who represented the United Kingdom, warned that lessons of the Holocaust are searingly relevant to this day, adding that hatred and intolerance still lurk in the human heart and adopt new disguises. Separately, in a move that appeared timed to coincide with the event, Germany banned the neo-Nazi group named Combat 18 Deutschland. Police carried out raids in 6 German states early on Thursday. The group is an offshoot of Combat 18, which was founded in Britain in the early 1990s as a militant wing of the British National Party. Jerusalem's Diplomatic Assembly, the city's largest ever political gathering, has shut down much of Israel. days ahead of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Monday, in a 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, Nazi death camp. While promoted as a signal of international consensus, an event of such magnitude was not devoid of political theatre and diplomatic confrontations. On Wednesday, Macron had a loud confrontation with an Israel security officer trying to escort the president into a French-owned Jerusalem church. But the biggest fury, however, was centred around the Polish president, Andrzej Duda, who, after being told he was not allowed to speak, but that Putin would, pulled out. The two leaders have sparred recently over Putin's comments, accusing Poland of complicity in the start of the Second World War. In his Jerusalem speech, Putin further argued the case, saying that Russia, which lost more than 20 million people, had paid the highest price, more than any other, in the war. He added that the European concentration camps were operated not just by Nazis, but by their henchmen in various countries. This is a clear kind of veiled insult that seems to aim at Poland. Poland has complained that Moscow had sought to rewrite the Soviet Union's role in the outbreak of the Second World War. Lithuania's president, Gitanas Nausėda, also pulled out of the trip to Jerusalem, although he did not provide a reason. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, used his speech to condemn what he called the tyrants of Tehran running Iran. He said he was concerned that we have yet to see a unified and resolute stance against the most anti-Semitic regime on the planet, clearly referring to the Iranians there, I think. Mike Pence joined his ally, railing against Israel's arch foe. The world must stand strong against Iran, he told delegates. Mr. Netanyahu, who faces 3 corruption indictments and an upcoming March election, has sought to use the mass gathering of leaders to press on other issues. He wants to build opposition against the International Criminal Court, which is investigating allegations of war crimes in the Palestinian territories. On Tuesday, he called for sanctions against ICC officials, including its prosecutor. Macron met the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, on Wednesday, and Putin and Prince Charles are expected to do the same. The Israeli Prime Minister also hopes to use Putin's trip to pressure Russia to release a 26-year-old Israeli woman held in Russia for smuggling cannabis. On Thursday, Putin met Naama Issachar's mother, Yafa, and hinted that she might be released soon. I told her that I shall say it again, that everything will be fine, he said. So there seems to be quite a lot of business being done, as well as this major Holocaust memorial.
There's nothing mentioned there about the fact that Prince Charles refused to even acknowledge Mike Pence as he walked past.
I wasn't aware of that day, actually.
It was quite interesting to see. He just walked right past him.
It's a strange thing, isn't it? But the number of leaders from different powers who were there, who didn't get on, probably greater than those who did.
Absolutely.
And everybody there seemed to have another agenda.
Well, particularly where Israel's concerned.
Yeah.
Because their agenda is for them to appear to be the good guy and the Palestinians to be the bad guys.
And then painting Iran as the ultimate
Painting
enemy
Iran,
in the Middle
yes,
East.
exactly.
Which, of course, again, is something which would annoy Boris Johnson, I beg your pardon, Mr. Putin, because he has an alliance in Syria, and also he supplies, I believe Russia supplies some arms and weapons to Iran as well. I may be wrong there, but definitely a lot of politicking going on at this meeting.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to politics, but this time involving the Gaelic language, the SNPs and Green MSPs have hit out at the Scottish Tories after their education spokesperson suggested that children schooled in Gaelic would be at a distinct disadvantage to their peers educated in English. Liz Smith made the controversial remarks, suggesting that educating pupils in Gaelic was a worrying and troubling move, which would put pupils at a distinct disadvantage. These comments come after the Tory MSP Alexander Burnett endorsed ridiculous claims that Gaelic language is divisive. Gaelic is not and has never been the language of Scotland, and Gaelic road signs have led to confusion amongst foreign drivers and even some locals. Now, this is the Conservatives again going on about this business of Gaelic road signs, Gaelic education. Alistair Allen, MSP, commented today, the level of ignorance on display in Liz Smith's comments is staggering.
I'm shocked at Liz Smith, actually.
You are?
I'm totally shocked. Because way back, I've been at meetings and on panels where she has been, and she seemed such a reasonable, sensible person. But as the years have gone on, she's become entrenched in this awful, dictatorial, Tory-driven hatred. And it's a ploy to keep the native speakers down, like they're doing in Wales.
This is more cultural repression.
It's cultural repression. That's the word I'm looking for, and it's so obvious.
Well, the argument against it was put, I think, very well here by Alistair Allen, MSP, who said the level of ignorance on display is staggering. Children educated in Gaelic, far from being disadvantaged, come out of school bilingual, and the evidence points to them having a higher attainment level in all areas, including English.
Yes, but that's been known for long time. It's scientifically proven.
And also it's common throughout Europe for children to learn
have
two languages. At least, and most European children learn English as a second language. And they are by far smarter and more advantaged by doing so. The Western Isles are the last place in Scotland where the majority of the population still speak the language, and they do so despite ignorant remarks directed at Gaelic speakers down the ages. I had been under the impression that all parties in the Parliament supported both Gaelic and the Gaelic medium education. I would ask Ms Smith to withdraw and apologise for these highly offensive remarks, which show a total lack of understanding of what Gaelic medium education is. Now, the Highlands and Islands Scottish Greens MSP John Finney has slammed comments from the Tory education spokesman Liz Smith, who said that presumption in favour of teaching primary school children in the Western Isles in Gaelic was a deeply troubling step, and one that could put children in the Western Isles at a distinct disadvantage to their peers. Mr Finney said, Liz Smith's comments are as offensive as they are inaccurate. The reasons behind the historical decline of Gaelic in the Western Isles are well documented, as are the benefits of bilingualism. Ms Smith would be well advised to read up on them. She should also apologise to my constituents and everyone who has worked so hard to increase the profile of Gaelic in recent years. So John Finney jumping right in there, as he should do, to defend his
my own daughter, who's in her 30s, she has been learning Gaelic for ages. There's an app that teaches different languages, and she uses that.
Duolingo.
Yes, that's the one.
An application you can now learn the language on your phone.
I've never said to her, oh, you must learn Gaelic or anything like that. This is driven from her desire to learn Gaelic.
I had an inkling to do a bit of Gaelic learning myself a while ago. It's just finding the time for me is always difficult. Anyway, apparently the Duolingo app, I am told, is excellent for this.
Oh, yes. She does Spanish on it as well, I think.
I believe there are many languages available. Anyway, back to the climate again, interestingly. The Committee on Climate Change has called for a fifth of Scotland to be reforested. Now, I know this is something of interest to you, Tay. The UK should plant many more trees, eat less meat, cut food waste and restore the peatlands if the country is to meet its climate target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050, the government's climate advisor said on Thursday. Britain last year became the first member of the group of 7 leading industrialised countries to set a net zero target, which will require wholesale changes to the way that Britons travel, eat and consume electricity. Now, I would like to disagree with that. I think Scotland was the first country to make a target of net zero. Britain is now running to catch up, I think.
Yes, very much so. And they're probably using our figures to place them where they think they are. And
we have an earlier target date as well, I believe, for our net zero.
Yes, that's one of the things that annoyed me when I heard them claiming to be the first country, and when I knew that they weren't. We were.
Yeah, this is it. This is part of the Conservative government's plans for post-Brexit Britain. And the report comes as Britain is developing its own farm policy for the first time in decades as it prepares to leave the European Union.
We had a land policy, a land use policy begun by Richard Lochhead way back, I think it would be 2007 or 8, and I went to the summit, the land use summit up in Inverness. I remember it distinctly, thoroughly enjoyed it, and talked to the lady who was in charge of soils. She was working for the EU at the time, and she came over, and there was going to be a soils directive, but then they didn't do it. But, you know, we're way ahead. From that, it went on to a food policy for Scotland, sustainability. There's been lots and lots of little things on the way. And down there, they're only just catching up. They haven't caught up.
Well, according to this report, it said that Britain should increase forestry cover up to 17%. So that's up from 13% of cover at the moment.
Well, we're way more than that.
Well, I think they're referring mostly to England and Wales by the sound of this.
Were they not about, are they even 12%?
13 maximum, apparently, is the tree coverage for England and Wales.
Yeah. Because, basically, they've got such good soils.
Except they're not going to keep their good soils if they keep cutting down trees and hedgerows.
Well, are they able? I don't think you're allowed to pull a hedgerow down.
I'm not sure
Linear
about that.
features, certainly in Scotland, you are not allowed.
The report has said that Britons also should eat 20% less of the most carbon-intensive foods, such as beef and lamb, and reduce their food waste. This would translate into a 10% reduction in cattle and sheep numbers by 2050. They're even, you know, they're also, okay, they're talking about the idea of manufacturing proteins instead of meats. And I mean, basically, we're talking about things like corn, I guess, is a trade name for it. Well, mycoprotein and other types.
Are they not talking about synthetic proteins?
Yes.
Corn comes from
mushroom
soya
fibre
and stuff, doesn't it?
So instead of putting sheep in the hills, they're talking about growing mushrooms in sheds and underpasses and harvesting the protein from.
Well, fair enough. Let's have some, but let's.
But it would require
have a bit of balance.
It would require a major industrial realignment as well.
Yes.
And of course, the farmers would need to be compensated as well. You know, because it's going to affect everybody's business. Nobody is going to make a living if they lose 10%.
Yes. Yes.
What do you think would happen to the land if the farmers took the sheep from the land?
Well, you can already see evidence of what's happening in up in the hills where the bracken has taken over.
And that's the fern-like coverage that you see. It's about 2 metres deep in places.
Yes. And gorse. Heather goes rank, and then you get wildfires because the heather's gone rank and it's not managed.
So you get fires as well on the hillsides in the summer.
And they're not fires that are necessarily set by human beings. They're just either natural fires or somebody's been careless.
And of course, if it's a peat-covered moor, the peat burns as well, doesn't it? It burns down into the ground, destroys the
Whereas
peat.
if a managed fire, it doesn't burn right down. But if it's a wildfire, it does. And it becomes a wildfire because the heather grows to about this height and it's rank and dry and unmanaged.
Well, this climate change committee in the UK, at least, is saying that Britain should restore at least 50% of its upland peat and 25% of its lowland peat to capture carbon dioxide. Much of Britain's peatland has been affected by livestock grazing, drainage for agriculture, which can lead to emitting carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere.
But that was the case. We have been restoring peatlands in Scotland for years.
They're considered a wildlife habitat, are they not? For certain species.
Yes, they are. But more importantly, they're considered a carbon store.
Yeah.
Do we not have the largest peatland area in the European Union in Scotland?
It's possible. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure we do.
The Climate Change Committee, which is independent from the British government, is chaired by former British Environment Secretary John Gummer and includes business and academic experts, not a farmer in it.
Is he not the one that fed his child the hamburger?
John Gummer was the very man who said that BSE didn't harm your children
Your
so you could
children.
feed them burgers. That's exactly right. You've got a good memory, Dave.
Well, not always.
Anyway, the Scottish Green Party have said it doesn't go far enough and could hand money to rich landowners. While the Greens agree that there needs to be a significant increase in today's levels of tree planting, it should be driven by the public sector and reach the EU average of forest cover.
Yeah.
So they're setting a target which would align with European targets,
Yes,
so that there is a comparative parity between them.
that's right. I mean, we did have a target of 25% tree cover, and I don't know whether that still holds, but we've moved up towards that.
Well, it's interesting that the Scottish Green Environment spokesman, Mark Ruskell, has said that reforesting a fifth of Scotland would only be the start of what is needed if we're to tackle the climate emergency. Scottish Greens would reforest Scotland to the European average of 40%. So that's nearly half of the Scottish Highlands would be forested. And I'm guessing that is probably very similar to the levels before the Highland clearances and before human beings began to fell trees for cultivation. The great Caledonian pine forest that once covered most of the Western Highlands.
I don't know if it was before the clearances. It'd be interesting to find out.
It would have predated the clearances,
Yes,
I think.
it would be. I mean, there's no reason why it couldn't be done. But what you have to bear in mind is we only have just about 15% of productive agricultural soils. The rest are unproductive soils.
The rest are soils that you can't grow food on.
So what you need to preserve are your native breeds.
Right, so what do you mean by native breeds exactly?
Like Highland cattle, Galloway cattle, Aberdeen Angus.
So these are animals which are uniquely adapted to the conditions.
They're uniquely adapted. They're tremendous at converting rough grass into protein. And the same with the sheep.
What about the wild deer in the Highlands? How do you think this reforestation might affect them?
Well, it'll only affect them while the trees are being protected, and the Forestry Commission guys are out shooting them to protect their trees. But once the trees are grown, the deer come down to the forests to get shelter.
Yeah.
They're natural forest animals.
Of course, they are controlled by culling, and there is obviously a market.
To a degree.
There is a market for the meat. I
Yes.
must admit, I enjoy venison.
Yes, it is. It's very good. And it seems shocking that we have to import venison from New Zealand
That's
because the
astonishing.
demand is such, and yet we're not able to meet that supply. One or two farmers are producing their own venison.
Why is venison in short supply in Scotland? That's an interesting.
Because we haven't got our act together, there aren't enough farmers producing it to the standard that the consumer wants. Wild venison is, you wouldn't make much money at it because the carcass isn't well covered enough. Whereas the farmed venison is produced a bit like your sheep, and
So it's well
you've got
fed,
more meat.
well nourished.
It's well nourished, and there's more meat percentage to the actual frame.
Okay, I understand. Listen, we're going to leave this subject just now. We have time for another couple of stories. This one is Andy Whiteman has launched a tool for reporting short-term lets. The Scottish Green MSP Andy Whiteman has launched an online tool which allows people to report short-term let properties operating in their community. The HomesFirst.Scot website includes a simple form which allows local residents to express concern where a whole property is no longer anyone's permanent home and instead is being used for short-term lets. An interactive map will chart the locations to give users a better idea about where such properties are concentrated. The Lothians MSP has campaigned for greater regulation of the properties, which can cause distress for local residents and lack of affordable housing where concentrations exist. After failing to back Andy Whiteman's amendments to the planning bill last year, the Scottish Government announced a licensing scheme earlier this month. Commenting, Andy Whiteman said the growth in short-term lets is out of control in Edinburgh and of increasing concern all across Scotland. The Scottish Government's movement towards licensing is welcome, but we still don't have a clear picture of how many former homes have been given over to commercial purpose and where they are concentrated. This tool will help us to better understand the scale of the problem. So Andy Whiteman is well known in many Scottish circles for his his great work on land reform and the history of land ownership in Scotland. So he's an expert.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a useful
I do.
move
I
by
think
Mr. Whiteman?
I'm not sure if this one wasn't driven by the Airbnb situation in Edinburgh.
That people are actually just keeping homes empty.
Which is slightly different to the kind of work that Andy's more famous for on land reform. But that's not to say that the Airbnb thing in Edinburgh and other cities isn't critical. Yeah,
this appears to be an indirect targeting of Airbnb. He hasn't mentioned it specifically in this story, but but of course any organisation or group which is renting out rooms to people ad hoc like this in private properties. Anyway, I'm going to move on to our final story tonight. The Consumer Scotland Bill has passed its Stage 1 debate. Business Minister Jamie Hepburn has welcomed the Stage 1 vote in Parliament, where MSPs unanimously voted to endorse the general principles of the government's Consumer Scotland Bill. The legislation will establish Consumer Scotland, a new body dedicated to protecting the interests of consumers. Mr. Hepburn said, "I'm pleased that the Scottish Parliament has supported this bill. The majority of our experiences when buying goods and services are positive, but that's not always the case. Sometimes there are persistent problems that have a big impact, such as delivery charges in rural Scotland or a lack of access to cash machines that need to be addressed. Consumer Scotland will be a champion for everyone across Scotland, dedicated to investigating consumer harm and developing solutions to tackle it. Working alongside other consumer-focused organisations, it will ensure that Scotland is a place where voices are listened to and can make change happen." Again, this is a good piece of legislation, and I think perhaps it is of particular use in rural communities.
Yes.
Because of these mentioned problems of delivery charges.
Yes. Cash machines.
And cash machines is something that really irritates people, isn't it? Because
although we do, it depends how remote your villages are, but I use the post office an awful lot. And I use it as a bank.
But of course, even post offices are being closed down now as well, and sometimes they're only open a couple of days a week.
Well, we're so lucky. We've got one in my local village, and he's even open on a Sunday.
Excellent. Well, this story also involves consumer standards, so we'll be looking at the quality of goods being supplied, whether they're suitable, whether they're safe, and it's basically a consumer rights, a consumer protection sort of arrangement that allows people to make complaints and have a government body in Scotland which can deal with them. This used to be done on a UK-wide basis. I haven't heard much about consumer rights nowadays in the UK.
No, it's all been very quiet, hasn't it?
But trading standards used to be the one, didn't it?
Yeah, well, they're still going.
But it was run by local authorities.
It is, yes. And bizarrely, if there are sheep and cattle loose on the road, it's trading standards that come and deal with it.
Right, I didn't know that. Well, listen, thanks for that. We're getting close to the end of the show, as you know, and sort of wanted to make some closing comments now because we're coming up to the end of our time here. As you know, Scotland at 7 is manned by volunteers such as myself and Day, and we need your help to continue making programmes. So if, as we ask you every week, you want to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions on your screen now by going to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, or you can donate a single amount as well. Anyway, that's about it from us here at Scotland at 7 tonight. I will be back on your screens on Monday, I hope. But for the moment, from myself and Day and from everyone here in the studio, a very good night to you.
Good night.